So we will make a start with our first ever full online ANZREG conference. So welcome to the 2020 ANZREG conference. My name's Cate Bardwell. I'm the chair of ANZREG. I'm currently acting university librarian at the University of Otago Library in Dunedin, New Zealand. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands where our Australian participants are located today and pay respect to their elders past, present and future, for they hold the memories, traditions, culture and hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples of Australia. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai, haere mai. In Māori, the word hui describes a gathering, meeting or conference. When we meet using Zoom in New Zealand, we refer to it as a zui. So I extend a warm welcome to you all in this ANZREG zui for 2020. Before I introduce the keynote, there's a few things that I'd like to cover around how we're going to run this forum. But before I do that, I want to start by acknowledging the generosity of Igaloo. So we're using the Igaloo Zoom account to run this event, and we really want to encourage you to continue supporting Igaloo, encourage your institutions to renew their Igaloo memberships, even if we are unable to attend the exotic locations of Igaloo conferences right now. I also want to thank in advance our presenters today. So usually we would provide each speaker with a small gift of appreciation. However, in the online world, that's a little more challenging. So this year, the committee is making a donation of $200 to the Indigenous Literacy Foundation of Australia in lieu of speaker gifts. So we've got a fantastic number of registrations this year, 289, it's our biggest ever conference. So that's fantastic, thank you all. We really appreciate the support of our community. So this is how we're going to run this online forum. We are recording each session so that people can watch it, revisit it, or people who can't attend today can watch the sessions. And there will be breaks after each session, and we will stick to the advertised times because not everyone will be sitting in the entire conference. You're welcome to ask questions of the presenters. If you want to do this, can you please post your question in the Q&A section? You can do that at any time. Don't use the chat, so you need to use that Q&A option. If someone posts a question that you're particularly interested in having answered, if you could like that question, because we'll start with the most popular questions first. So I think that's all our housework that I need to cover about how we're going to run this forum. For those of you who are sitting in the conference for the day, unfortunately you're going to hear that repeated a few times because we have to cover the rules before each presentation. So apologies for that. So I would now like to welcome our keynote speaker to this forum, Nancy Lorimer. So Nancy is currently the head of the metadata department at Stanford University, where she oversees original metadata creation, data control, and e-resources, and participates in linked data projects and planning. Nancy, formerly a music metadata librarian, she participated in the development of RDA Library of Congress vocabularies for music, and led a project to add music terms to the LC genre form thesaurus for library and archival materials before moving into the world of linked data. Nancy is currently also a member of the Program for Cooperative Cataloguing Policy Committee, the PCC Standing Committee on Training, and is co-chair of both the LC-PCC Task Group on Aggregates in Beta RDA Toolkit and the Task Group on PCC Sinopia Application Profiles. Her interests include identity management, ontology and vocabulary development, and the adaptation of traditional technical services workflow to integrate linked data that both create new and gather from disparate sources. Nancy has quite a few qualifications that support her in this, with a B Mus Honours, Music History, M.List from the University of Western Ontario in Canada, and a Masters in Music from the University in Edinburgh. She has also done doctoral work at the University of Chicago in medieval music. So Nancy is presenting on Widening Our Circles, Linked Data, MARC, and the Transformation of Library Data. And I'm going to hand it over to Nancy. She's going to speak for about 30 minutes and leave plenty of time for questions. So I encourage you all to think of questions, post them in the Q&A, and we will deal with those after her presentation. So over to you, Nancy.
Thank you. And while I share my screen, I will apologize for the mouthful of the name of those task groups. They are quite long. Let's see, come on, slideshow. There we go. Okay, do I have things the right way around?
Yes, you're all good, Nancy.
Okay, thank you. It's always hard to tell when you first get in there. So, good Wednesday morning to all of you, though actually here where I am in California, it is still Tuesday afternoon. Since I am the first speaker today, I will take it on myself to once again welcome you to the very first ANZREG conference. Now I know it's called that. To all of the organizers, I would like to acknowledge the huge amount of work and time and cost that it took you to prepare a virtual conference. I know it's a very difficult thing to do. I would also like to thank you for inviting me to speak to you today. I admit I would rather have met with you in person, but I am still happy to be able to participate from my lonely office at Stanford. Before I begin, I would like to pause to acknowledge that I am speaking to you from Stanford, California, which occupies the lands of the Muwekma Ohlone people of the San Francisco Bay Area, as does my own home in Sunnyvale. Let us remember their continued connection to this region and offer our respects to their elders and to all Ohlone people of the past and present. I really felt this montage was perhaps the best way to show my love for my adopted home. And so a little bit more about myself. I think you heard many of it, but I am the head of the metadata department at Stanford, in Stanford, California. In case you haven't seen it, the photo on your right is of Stanford Main Quad and where I live about 15 kilometers south on the right. As you said, the metadata department is responsible for metadata creation, also known as cataloging. We work in MARC, we work in MODS, and soon we'll be working in BibFrame, and of course in RDA, for physical and electronic resources, metadata remediation, and managing various metadata projects, including linked data. We have been involved in the last several years with a series of Mellon Foundation funded projects called Linked Data for Production, centered around developing infrastructure and potential workflows for library technical services in a linked data environment. Our current grant has the theme Closing the Loop, meaning that we are striving to bring together various threads of development to create a linked data ecosystem. And as we said before, prior to my current position, I was the head of music technical services at Stanford. So my training was primarily in music cataloging, which will be very obvious in the examples I use in this talk. And just as an aside, to remind you that California is not as always idyllic as I've shown you in the last two slides. This is more what it looked like when I was writing up the abstract for this talk. The photo on the left is the view from my in-laws' house before they evacuated to mine for a week. And of course, up top is the Golden Gate Bridge. Fires, bad air, orange skies, pandemic, and social upheaval have not made for an easy year here, and I doubt it has in Australia or New Zealand also. And I'm sure you Australians particularly recognize these scenes. But let us go on to more inspiring things, linked data. I put before you this statement: the world enriched with library data, libraries enriched with the world's data. This is the newly minted vision statement of the LD4 community, a community based around linked data and libraries and related institutions, and in a very and in a very few words, it sums up the hopes and dreams of linked data. We imagine a metadata ecosystem in which we provide structured, well-crafted metadata about library resources to the world, and in return, our metadata is enriched by perhaps less well-crafted from our own point of view, but immensely rich metadata created by expert communities and enthusiasts throughout the world. Liberated from the so-called tyranny of MARC and its carefully curated but inexpressive silo of data, the possibilities for more flexible and responsive metadata models that are machine actionable and able to interact with other web-based data are enticing. It is a fine dream, one that recognizes the value of different outlooks and sees metadata as dynamic and flexible. It is also really scary for all the same reasons. This dream of moving into a dynamic relationship with metadata on the web means that we as librarians need to explore ways in which we can actively share our data with others. In practical terms, this means moving away from our MARC environment in which we have so long resided and into one in which the data and the relationships among that data that librarians care about the most is shared in a way that can be reused and linked to other data sources. But like many large-scale transformations, to be successful, we need to contend with multiple challenges, from reworking technical services workflows and reimagining our integrated library systems, to the urgent need for inclusivity in society and thus in our metadata. In these tumultuous times that are our current reality, can we really succeed with this? So what is it about MARC? The MARC formats were developed in the 1960s at the Library of Congress by Henriette Avram, a computer scientist and system analyst, and one of my heroes, and intended as a metadata transmission standard or communication format for library metadata. By all accounts, MARC has been wildly successful, having survived for 60 years. In 1971, it became the standard in the United States. 2 years later, it had already become an international standard. It is important to remember, however, that while it became a standard in the 70s, most of us never saw an online catalog until the 80s, and the Library of Congress only stopped printing cards for distribution in the last several years. And while we talk about the MARC formats as if they were one thing, they have in fact come in many flavors. The two that are currently dominate are MARC 21 and Unimarc, and they do not interoperate well without intervention. MARC was a wonderful creation and may well hold the record for one of the oldest computer formats still used. But that age, while it has brought a lot of stability to the cataloging world over the years, has its drawbacks. Its early requirement of being both a computer storage system and to print catalog cards meant that for all intents and purposes, it took the library card catalog and placed it on the screen. Developed when computing power was low and computer storage expensive and scarce and kept on huge tapes, the MARC format creates a flat database record in one long string. The technology is limited and outdated, and it is difficult for current computer systems to interpret or manipulate. That stability, so useful in so many ways, has also served to inhibit innovation. Let's take a quick look at a MARC record. I warned you that I was once a music cataloger, and because of this, I go for music examples. Also, music records also perhaps most clearly illustrate the drawbacks of MARC. This is a bibliographic record, split up, of course, for a CD of Love from Afar, an opera by Kaya Sariaho, with a libretto by Amin Malouf. This information about the work Love from Afar, is displayed in several parts of the record, as I have circled here, both as controlled vocabularies, the parts in blue, and just as simple text. The controlled terms are linked, but only to another database within the library system, in this case, OCLC. On the web, they most likely are represented as text strings, unless they are in the database again. We also have information about the performance recorded on this CD, including dates, places, and participants. Then we also have information about the actual publication, such as the awards it was given, the program notes, technical details about the CD, and such as publisher numbers and the fact that it's an essay CD rather than an ordinary CD. And admittedly rare with sound recordings, this record also has a note about the actual score edition used in the performance of this work, suggesting a related manifestation. So there is information in this one record here about the work, the publication, and the performance, all mixed together in one database record and all over the place on the page. To understand all the relationships and snippets of information requires human intervention. A MARC record is intended to be read, a legacy of the card environment. This is not something a computer can interpret easily, except on a minimal scale. To computer, the MARC record is inexpressive and difficult to manipulate. Now, I'm showing you here a fairly simple MARC record for a sound recording, nothing like I might show to the Music Library Association. The majority of sound recordings have multiple works, and the information is even more inaccessible, given that it is often combined into individual notes and even controlled fields. So to compare MARC and linked, oh, I got this the wrong, MARC and linked data. I'm going to go forward for a moment. So how do we use linked data for bibliographic description? In our linked data for production grants, known here as LD4P, and thus at my institution, we use the BibFrame ontology developed by the Library of Congress as a successor for the MARC format. BibFrame is designed to enable the discovery of bibliographic information on the web and in the broader networked world. It uses the Resource Description Framework, or RDF, a data model consisting of statements expressed in triples. In RDF, every entity, such as an author, subject, place, etc., ideally will have a corresponding unique identifier in the form of a URI. Thus, every entity and every relationship is expressed that way, not as a text string. The text string that is links to the URI can change, but that link will always remain. BibFrame is loosely based on functional requirements of bibliographic records, or FRBR as we call it in the United States, and is centered on three primary entities, which you can see in the center there: works, instances, and items. Other entities are defined in relation to one of those three entities. One aspect of BibFrame that moves outside FRBR or LRM, FRBR's successor, is the addition of an event class. While it's not pictured here as part of the primary framework, but instead off to the right, you will see it over in the top right, we will see that it can bring a great deal of potential flexibility to the BibFrame structure. I'm just going to go back. So to compare, whereas in MARC, we rely on the database record, in linked data, data elements are linked together as individual independent statements and are not tied to a record format. That makes them reusable in other contexts and easily reconciled. And whereas in MARC, identifiers are generally text strings, in linked data, identifiers are expressed primarily by URIs. Likewise, relationships in RDF, the basis of much linked data again, are expressed as semantic triples in the form of URIs rather than text strings, notes, or database field numbers. Because of this, triples are machine readable and machine actionable. Finally, linked data produces entity-based descriptions that may be linked through ontology-defined relationships to produce individual work or manifestation descriptions, making it much more reusable, at least theoretically. Because of this built-in ability of linked data to semantically link individual relationships among data elements, linked data has the potential to provide greater flexibility and more expressiveness to our cataloging, and just as importantly, to link to other sources of data. But to do that, we need a model of all those data elements, and that is the role of an ontology such as BibFrame. So there have been a lot of descriptions of what BibFrame is and does, both laudatory and derogatory. So let's summarize what is true and maybe not so true. So BibFrame is an initiative to evolve bibliographic description standards to a linked data model. That is the Library of Congress's goal. A core ontology that covers the basics of bibliographic description as currently conceived, a successor to MARC formats for cataloging, and a common framework for the creation of linked data in the library community. However, BibFrame is not. It is not a replacement for MARC, even though you will hear people, including the Library of Congress, say that. It does not have every MARC field in it. It is not a one-stop shop for linked data creation. It requires additional vocabularies, just as MARC does, and it probably requires extensions for various domains, specialized domains, such as, say, sound recordings or rare materials. And really, linked data is not your only choice. And linked data is about choice. So BibFrame is intended as a lightweight framework, not a fully developed ontology. To use it, the framework requires the filling out of vocabularies and relationships, either drawing on other ontologies or developing new subclasses or vocabularies within BibFrame itself. This light framework provides a highly flexible environment, however, easily subjected to manipulation, expansion, and contraction, depending on one's needs. So let's explore some of that possibility. Let's say we have 3 BibFrame works, A, B, and C, each with their own instance and their own item. We will say that they are very closely related and that they are the equivalent of the library reference model expressions of the same work, but not necessarily directly related to one another. To put it less abstractly, here's our opera again, where we have 1 score and 2 separate audio recordings, all of them fairly unrelated. What is lacking is a node that brings all these together. So what we can do here is we add another level of BibFrame work, which can bring them all together. This abstracted work level is actually being used right now in an experimental interface by the Library of Congress, where it is called a hub. In another implementation, that of Share VDE, the shared virtual discovery environment developed by Casalini Libri and Occult, it is called an opus. In reality, both are simply another layer of the BibFrame work, just at a somewhat abstracted level. To show what a real-life situation, this will look better in a minute, we're with our opera again. Love from Afar is published as a CD, which you see down near the bottom in green. It is also published as a video up above and a notated score, which also has a vocal score derived from it. There is also a separately published libretto up on your top right, which happens to have a Turkish translation. There is also another work by the same composer called Reflet sur l'amour de loin, which is based on the opera, but a separate work. That adds up to 7 BibFrame works. Now, if you add events, which we were talking about earlier, we have 4 known performances of this opera. The world premiere, for which we have no recording, the performance captured on video, and 2 recording sessions that resulted in the sound recording. As you can see, except for the performance, 3 performances, and the clearly derived vocal score and libretto in Turkish, we have nothing that connects any of these. And this is, again, where this node, the hub or opus, comes into being. This can be very useful in a discovery system, clustering groups of works together in an LRM-like fashion. So here's an example from the Share VDE discovery interface, which I'm not sure how well you can read, but you can see along we have the main opus in the middle there, and on the left we have the various public grouped together under various expressions of the work. So while that model emphasized the work concept by adding yet another layer of work, this is not always desirable. FRBR and LRM are built on a set of philosophical assumptions based mainly on late 19th century philosophies that really emphasize the concept of creative work. It is much more difficult to satisfactorily catalog resources that lie outside this philosophical structure, even such things as jazz or traditional, and especially traditional and popular musics of non-Western cultures around the world. We tend to get very hung up on the notion of everything being a work, and even a creative work. I mean, is that really true? Is a religious work, religious ceremony a work? Is a song sung by a god channeled through a shaman a creative work? The notion of what is and what is not a work is culturally bounded, and many cultures make no use of the concept of a work at all. This is an important issue if you aim to catalog materials while paying due respect to the cultural milieu in which they were created or communicated. As libraries, we will always have the instance or item level at our center because this is what we provide to our public, books, CDs. But does everything have to be a work as well? Well, in BibFrame, it is possible, if not completely to get rid of the concept of work, to reduce and frame its use in such a way as to allow for other worldviews to perhaps peek through. This is where the BibFrame event comes into play. A traditional ceremony, and here I have the way of AHG, which I'm not going to pronounce exactly, but a traditional ceremony like this may not be a creative work to those who celebrate it, but it is an event, and that event can be described fully in BibFrame with some extension vocabulary. If we fully describe the ceremony as an event, emphasizing it, that BibFrame work becomes restricted to being a recording only of that event, a recording that brings the event into library culture without naming that event so much a creative work. This is a subtle change perhaps, but with local extensions, additional vocabularies, and outside links, could help bridge some cultural worldviews. Now that we have such a flexible ontology, it is certainly worth a try. So these are some things to think about within BibFrame. Can we use BibFrame to describe library data in culturally respectful ways while still maintaining the interoperability we hope for with linked data? Okay, I admit I don't quite have an answer to that yet, but it's certainly worth a try. We do have two other ways of adapting BibFrame. One other is to adapt or manipulate the BibFrame model to add extensions, as I mentioned in passing earlier. Two examples of these, though while still in development, are the Art and Rare Materials ontology and the Performed Music ontology, developed to primarily leave the core BibFrame intact, but that extend classes and vocabularies to suit specific domain requirements. This improves the depth of description available while still letting systems unable to read the extensions to make use of the core material. Another alternative is to work completely outside BibFrame in another open access domain. This is something that the Program for Cooperative Cataloging is exploring for agents, people, corporations, etc., which are not really modeled in BibFrame. PCC has been looking at two data repositories that provide internationally known identifiers for agents and works, being ISNI and Wikidata. Complementary in their strengths and weaknesses, PCC has been exploring working directly in these data repositories and then referring to them in BibFrame descriptions. This work has potential to provide broader application of our expertise in non-library repositories and reduce duplicative work between our authority file and ISNI and Wikidata, and also get rid of an annoying time lag between the creation of an authority record in the Library of Congress name authority file and the creation of a URI for that authority. Also, the requirements for both ISNI and Wikidata are much lower than the name authority file, allowing for faster creation of name URIs, something that is absolutely necessary, given that in a linked data environment, every name requires an identifier. So I've shown you BibFrame and some possible ways to manipulate it, but can we actually use it? Can we even use BibFrame as it currently stands? This brings up the question of infrastructure, an apt topic in an ILS-based conference. Infrastructure is perhaps the hardest part of implementing linked data. We are moving out of a cataloging environment that, despite many updates and changes over the years, is really still strongly based on the MARC record. And it has been this way since the ILS was invented. And we're now moving to a potentially whole new ecosystem. This is a hard thing to do. In the US, where cooperative cataloging is basic to our cataloging ethic, we not only have to consider our own individual needs as an institution, but also for those who will not move so quickly into the new environment. Remember that time lag I mentioned with MARC? It will be the same with linked data. So on this slide is listed some basic necessary tools for linked data infrastructure: an ontology, an ILS, a couple converters, an Rdf editor, application profiles, and reconciliation and entity management services. We have already spoken about ontologies at length, so we will move on to the ILS. So when we speak of our system as librarians, we are generally thinking about our integrated library system, or ILS. In your case, mostly I would suppose is ALMA. All ILSs integrate acquisitions, cataloging, and circulation functions. That is what a basic ILS does. Some, like ALMA, bring in far more, such as e-resource management and others. But there is, of course, still far more than that that covers the whole library ecosystem. This monstrosity that you see on the screen is an illustration of the Stanford Systems ecosystem. Our ILS, not ALMA, is in the center in that purple circle. And you can see how everything in that diagram actually connects to it eventually. It is not necessary to understand the whole diagram in detail, just to notice that vast number of connections that there are from outside sources to our ILS, which in our case is still very much MARC-based. ALMA, I believe, is one step removed from that in creating a more inventory layer. The point is that you still need an ILS to bring together various functions both within and outside your system. That's not going to change. And given the long time lag in adoption of linked data, it will need to handle incoming data in MARC and in BibFrame, and perhaps other ontologies. I don't know yet of a system that can really do that. There are also some functions, such as financials, that you don't really want to express as linked data, or especially linked open data. A relational database is really the natural home for such things. So there are a lot of things to think about for an ILS. Related to that are converters, and converters are a major requirement for the foreseeable future. Clearly, to work in a BibFrame linked data environment, we need to convert all of our legacy MARC data, and there is a lot of it. This is clearly a huge undertaking, one that most libraries will need to outsource. But we will also continue to receive MARC data from outside vendors for ages to come. At Stanford, over 80% of our current metadata comes from sources outside Stanford, whether it's OCLC, through copy cataloging, or from a vendor. That is not going to change anytime soon. You ALMA users are luckier than most in that you can already convert your data to various RDF serializations within your system. This has been one of the ALMA's strong points for many years. I believe that you are also able to add URIs to MARC records within ALMA, creating what we call linking MARC, which is easier to convert and can be used with unconverted MARC data to populate knowledge graphs in a truly hybrid MARC data environment. In Stanford's case, we have outsourced both our legacy and new record conversion to Share VDE. It's too big for us to do. MARC records go out on a nightly basis, are enhanced with URIs, and returned to us. Share VDE also converts the records to BibFrame and integrates them into the Share VDE environment, and will eventually be sending them back to us too. So that is a MARC to BibFrame converter, but why a BibFrame to MARC converter? Well, again, it's that ILS. Some ILS functions may require MARC data to operate for some time to come. Unless you are in the market for and can find an ILS based entirely on linked data, You need to convert any bitframe data to MARC or whatever intermediary communication format your system uses. This is truly difficult to do and annoying to spend your time on, but in these transition years seems necessary. And of course, if you want to be part of a cooperative cataloging community, such as we are at Stanford, there will be people that need MARC records rather than bitframe. Then we have the Rdf Editor. We can catalog in MARC and convert to bitframe all we want, but unless we move to original metadata creation in native RDF, we will never escape the MARC record. MARC is not expressive enough to convert cleanly to RDF, so we will lose explicit relationships that can be built into a bitframe description. And further, we will not be able to enhance our data from within with relationships that do not exist in a MARC record, or the flexibility that comes from linked data, unless we start to catalog directly in RDF. Conversion is a necessary first step, but it is not the last one. So what you see here on your screen is a linked data editor developed by Stanford for original cataloging in a linked data environment. It's called Sinopia. Sinopia allows the cataloger to create RDF on the spot, making use of templates that build the triples as you enter the data. This is what the RDF output looks like in a table form, so you know it's real. The templates are also in RDF and can be created and shared by individual knowledgeable users rather than relying on developers or other technical staff, something at least my catalogers have been wishing for a very, very long time. Sinopia also provides lookups to a number of vocabularies and lookups with context built around them. This is powered by Questioning Authority, or QA, a lookup service developed by Cornell University and the University of Iowa Library School. Sinopia also includes a prototype bitframe to MARC converter, and will soon have an API that uploads data to the Share VDE data space. There it will be reconciled with Share VDE URIs and clustered with others in their database. We are also able to search Share VDE and, of all things, Discogs for cataloging for reuse, though most of this is still a bit rough. Next on my list were application profiles. An application profile is simply something that states how you are using an ontology. What classes, what properties, how they are modeled, what lookups are available, and basic things like whether a value is mandatory or repeatable. Maps are necessary to provide information to potential users of your data, such as linked data providers and aggregators, reconciliation services, and those creating mappings to other ontologies, including MARC for conversion. This one I have shown you a piece of here is simply a spreadsheet. It is possible to have more complex machine-readable maps as well, using the SHEX or shackle. And last on my list were reconciliation services. Reconciliation services take local URIs and match them to more broadly recognized URIs. Obviously, every work or instance you create in Sinopia will have a Sinopia URI, and we would like to link it to broader ones. It can enhance your data as well, a reconciliation service with further data as the way you specify. And it resembles a pumped up authority service. I don't know about you, but we send out our records every week and they return authority records to us. So this is very much the same sort of thing. So there is our infrastructure, and you can see that it's a challenge. So just to sum up those challenges, it's time to point out the other real difficulties in reaching our linked data ideal. First and foremost, as looking at what we just did, changing is hard and can sometimes be expensive. We have deeply embedded infrastructures to change. I've spoken only so far of the so-called piping, the plumbing of this so far, but even more important are our staff. Staff need to be retrained and encouraged to join the change. We do not just want to fire them all and hire somebody else. Second, the mixed environment of MARC and linked data we will be living in for so many years to come creates challenges of its own. It makes it hard to move beyond the influences of the MARC record when so much of your data is the result of a conversion or must be converted back to MARC. And the dual streams also make all the technical work that much more complex. Third is interoperability. This may surprise you at first. I've been extolling the flexibility and adaptability of BibFrame to expand or morph as necessary. But BibFrame is also often too flexible. There are multiple ways to model the same relationships, and those choices are not necessarily compatible with one another. I mean, look at ALMA. ALMA converts data to BibFrame, but which BibFrame? There is not yet any particular standard or application profile to adhere to for modeling, and so far not any governing body to suggest one. In PCC, as with our Sinopia users group, we have decided that it is necessary to develop a common set of templates that act as an application profiles in collaboration with the Library of Congress. If catalogers want to expand or reduce the template in some way, they might copy that template, add or subtract new relationships, but still leave the core intact. That will at least guarantee some interoperability amongst ourselves. But even when we can do that, if our ILSs and discovery systems read only a particular flavor of BibFrame, especially one based on a MARC record conversion and no more, we will lose all the enhancements we seek to make. But so as not to end on a low note, linked data implementation is indeed difficult. But if and when we succeed, it will be worth it. The opportunities are many. The enrichment of our metadata from other sources, sharing our metadata with other libraries in the world, flexible modeling that can adapt to differing worldviews while remaining interoperable, meaningful library connections with non-library linked data repositories, and a dynamic presence in the metadata on the web. While we have a ways to go, we have already come far. You have an ILS vendor here who has seen the importance of linked data, Ex Libris. It is up to you to push them further to help develop the infrastructure you need to move to a more dynamic responsibility and enhanced cataloging environment. You know, it is one thing that it is very difficult to move forward, but it is even more difficult to become obsolescent. The difficulty moving forward is a temporary thing. Obsolescence is permanent. So remember that LD4 vision I put to you at the beginning of this talk? The world enriched with library data, libraries enriched with the world's data. This is a goal worth reaching, and I hope you are all in agreement with me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nancy. And this is the difficulty of the online world, because you would be having a huge applause from the audience. So that's me doing it for the 172 participants. I do want to acknowledge it is very challenging doing a presentation in this online world when you don't have that body language or the engagement from the audience. And I actually found myself sitting here nodding away, even though my video was turned off. Felt a bit odd, but it was a fantastic presentation, and I personally learned a lot. I have never operated as a cataloguer, and it was a long time ago since I did my MARC training. But you definitely corrected some misconceptions that I had about linked data and it not being a replacement for MARC. So definitely some things we will have all learned. We do have some questions in the Q&A. Can you see those, Nancy?
Let me just, yes, I can.
I will read them out just for the recording. So we'll start with the question from Ellen. That's got the most likes so far. So Ellen's question: how have your catalogers responded to moving from MARC to BibFrame? Happy, resistant, reluctant, eager, or anything else?
I think if they were honestly talking amongst themselves, I think all of the above: happy, resistant, reluctant, and eager. Stanford has been in a rather special situation, I will admit. We have a director who, way back in 2011, told the then head of the metadata department that Stanford was to move to linked data. And because of that, our catalogers have been working with BibFrame on and off as they can for several years now, actually. We've played a long time around in the Library of Congress editor. We were actually quite involved in the development of BibFrame 2.0 at one point. Most of the time, they are actually really enthusiastic. And especially now that we actually have an editor in which they can, our own editor in which they can create data. We are actually quite eager to move into production of original cataloging in using BibFrame. And we are aiming, we hope, to maybe the next year sometime. They have had a lot of training over the years and a lot of time to get used to it.
Thanks, Nancy. So moving on to the next question from Glenn, which is, with consideration paid to existing workloads and available resources, how can an established deposit library begin initiating the use of BibFrame more thoroughly within existing workflows? Do you have a response to that, Nancy?
I'm just trying to understand the question, perhaps. Imagining a situation where works and expressions are correctly identified and arranged. Yeah. It is true that between the new stuff and the older stuff, there will be a lot of cleanup required. And of course, we have not reached that stage either. The one thing is to have a really good transfer of data as much as you can when you convert. And in our case, I have to admit, a lot of it we are outsourcing to a vendor to be able to do that kind of cleanup and reconciliation on our behalf. I'm not exactly sure what a deposit library is. Does that mean a government documents library or a copyright deposit library in this case?
I think yes, probably the government document deposit library perhaps is what Glenn's referring to.
Right. But I will point out that yes, there will be messes. There certainly will be. But I would say our catalog at Stanford is also full of messes already. We have records that are in pre-AACR2, we have AACR2 records, we have hybrid RDA AACR2 records, we have RDA records. We are one of the most, the biggest contributors to the program for cooperative cataloging, which means name authorities and a particular level of record that we create. But we still have over 1 million names that do not have do not have unique identifiers of one sort or another. So the mess is already there. And yes, we have to work on ways to clean this up. But even if we assign all those names, those loan names, and assign them a URI, then they can go out and be reconciled at some point. And maybe we actually will be able to clean up some of our data we've never been able to clean up. And workloads, it's difficult, and you just, sometimes you also have to give up something to move forward.
Yeah, good point, Nancy. We've just got a couple more minutes and there's 2 more questions. So the question from Sonia, is your organisation starting to realise any of the benefits of linked data yet? You might have touched on this a little bit, but.
In all honesty, perhaps no. We have a lot of prototypes that are almost ready to go, but not quite yet. Would say, you know, this current pandemic era has slowed us down a little bit, just because of completely different workflows. I mean, all my staff works at home 3 days a week and is only in at most 2 days a week. So we have a ways to go there yet, but we still have hope. We will come soon.
Thanks for that. And just the final question that we have time for, do we have the library discovery layers that manage the ideal world of the beautiful linked data that you or we create?
No, not that I know of. You know, the thing you learn about discovery layers is that they are almost more enmeshed in MARC or in mods, in our case, MARC and mods, than the catalogers are. And that again is another big step that we need to work on. I mean, we can do things like knowledge graphs that attach themselves to your catalog. We can have, and then go out to areas like Wikidata or Music Brains or Discogs and that kind of thing. But we have done a slight bit of discovery with ours, but nowhere where we would like to be yet.
Thank you, Nancy.
I'm sorry, that may sound a little depressing, but we are trying hard.
It's realistic. So look, I really
The Library of Congress does have a prototype. I will say the Library of Congress has a prototype way of looking at records in BibFrame. And of course, the Share VDE discovery layer I showed you also has works and so forth that you can actually move around in it.
Right. So we will watch this space. That's a good note to finish on. So Nancy, I just want to thank you very much on behalf of ANZREG for providing us with this really stimulating keynote to start our online conference. I know that a lot of people, it's great to have the engagement of the questions, and I appreciate the time it's taken for you to prepare and present for us today. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. That's okay. Thank you all.
Thanks, Nancy.